Hello students, welcome back to BioLaunch. Today we are going to see grade 10 chapter 9 Heredity. We don't have evolution, that's been deleted for this year, so we are going to see only heredity. And before going into this lesson, we need to learn about some important basic terms that involves some important features about heredity. So let us see the first one. What is heredity? What is the meaning of heredity? Students, you would have heard about this common phrase, like begets like. That means an elephant can give birth only to elephants. Frog can give birth only to frogs. The same species will give birth to species of its own only. It cannot be a different species. This is what is like begets like. Now, this is the term we call as heredity. Now, how do we define heredity? So, look at this. The transfer of genetically controlled characters from one generation to the next generation in living organisms is what is called as heredity. Now, listen carefully. There are certain characters which are present in the DNA. These are the characters which will result in the same kind of species being produced as offsprings by the parent. So these characters are genetically controlled. That means they are in the DNA and they are being passed from one generation to next in living organisms. This entire process we term it as what? Heredity. Now, if you see the next term, what do you mean by inheritance? So, inheritance means what? The process by which the characters pass from one generation to the next. We mean to say that you would have heard in your families that people used to say you look like your father, you look like your mother, you resemble a lot like your grandfather or grandmother. How is this possible? That is because the characters which are held in the DNA is being passed from one generation to the next. So this process of passing of characters from one generation to next is called as what? Inheritance. Now, the next important thing is that variation. Now, if you all see, you're not exact copies of your parents. Definitely you differ from how your parents look. I'm talking about the morphological features. So, offsprings differ from parents and you also differ from your siblings. So, definitely there are differences except for monozygotic twins. So, this difference is called as what? Variation. Now, how does variation arise? It is when the copying of DNA. Important characteristic features I told you are held in the DNA. This should be copied to another daughter DNA. This is being passed on to two different daughter cells during the process of gamete formation. There might be some variation during this copying mechanism which can lead to variation. So this is what is called as the difference that you have with your siblings and your parents. That is what is called as variation. Now the next important term that we are going to learn is about genetics. When we talk about heredity as a chapter name in grade 10, this is an entire branch of biology we are talking about. This is called as genetics. Here we concentrate more on how characters are passed from one generation to next. What is the features that determine the morphological characteristics of offsprings? How do you differ from your parents? It is a broad term. Genetics is a branch of biology that we deals with heredity, inheritance and variation. And this is called as, this separate field of study is called as what? Genetics. Now let us move on to the next important person. Now whenever I teach students about the different processes in biology, I always give more importance to the person who is behind this entire discovery. And the person we are talking about is Gregor Gregor Johann Mendel is called as father of genetics. Why he is called father of genetics is because he was the one who laid the road for all the inheritance pattern that still exists today. He defined many principles of heredity and variation. How did he explain this principle? Because he was working in his monastery garden on a particular plant that is called as Pisum sativum. He did a lot of hybridization experiments which was new at that time, and based on his experiments he was able to frame a lot of principles and laws of heredity and variation. So let us see the life history of Mendel. He was born in the year 1822 and he grew up in a monastery in Austria, and he went to University of Vienna to study physics and botany. You can see here there is a strange selection of subjects here, physics and botany. And he came from a very poor family. He was not able to afford education. So he grew up in a monastery and he was given education there. And even though he aspired to become a teacher, he was not able to pass any of the teacher certification exams. And later he worked as a substitute teacher at a school in Brunn. And after studying physics and botany, he worked in his monastery garden. At the same time, he was also working as a teacher in a school there. And during this period, 1856 to 1863, he was doing his hybridization experiment on Pisum sativum, that is pea plant, to understand the mechanism of heredity and variation. And in the year 1865, he was able to present his results. And in 1866, he was able to publish his findings. And in the year 1884, he died due to kidney failure. This is to put together his life in very short form. And you should understand that Mendel worked on Pisum sativum throughout his life, and he actually worked on 7 specific characteristics on Pisum, and he was able to produce a very convincing result, but he was not sure of his results. So let us go to that part next. Whenever I come to this fact about Mendel here, I feel very saddened because he was a normal guy, even though he had a lot of brain and intelligence to work on these plants. He was a normal guy in the sense that he was not assertive enough, or he was not sure of his own results. He was not able to assert and tell the people around him that this is how the process of heredity and variation will operate in organisms. He was not that assertive. Next important drawback, why his findings did not gain popularity. I told you first point is he was not assertive. Second point is that him applying mathematical principles and logic to biology was new. In those days, I'm talking about the 1850s and 60s, people were not ready to accept it. Applying mathematical principle. We are going to see that in the later part of the lesson, that we are going to apply some probability and statistical analysis of all his results. But people were not able to, identify and comprehend what he was trying to say. That was a second drawback. Third one is that he was talking about traits as factors. What do you mean by traits? Traits are nothing but characters. We talk about a person being fair-skinned or dark-skinned. That is a character. So traits as factors was not accepted in those days. He claimed that there were certain factors which was passing from one generation to another. This term factor as traits, people were not able to accept it. Finally, coming to the fourth point, He published his result. I told you in the last one that he published his results. And where exactly did he publish it? He published it in a journal that had very limited circulation. So that is why it did not reach the masses. So his work went unnoticed. For a long time his work was unnoticed. If you ask me how long his work was unnoticed, about 100 years. After 100 years, 3 more scientists like De Vries, Shermark, these people started, exploring. They took up his work, and then the most important part was that these scientists were able to give credit to what Mendel was able to give. So they credited Mendel for all these findings, and they still started building upon it. So this is about why his findings did not gain popularity. Next one, why do we say Mendel's results were accurate? Why we say that his results were reliable? Point one is that he was working on pea plants, and these pea plants had large sampling size. He was not providing his results based on 10 or 20 or 100 plants. He was at a time able to give results based on 1,000 plants. So the sampling size was large, so that we are able to say that his results were reliable. Next one is that he had a very big advantage working on pea plants, is that he was focusing on a single character. He was able to focus on a single character at a time. There were 7 characters which we are going to see next. And each time he was working on a character to provide a result, he was focusing on one single character at a time. This is point number 2. And point number 3, he was working on contrasting traits which were clearly visible. For example, I could say, if you take human height as a character, there is no one who we can say that they belong to a tall category or a short category, dwarf category. There might be gradation, and the gradation is too huge here. So the height, if we take it as character, you cannot categorize human beings as one who are very, very tall and who are very, very short. But when he was working on pea plants, he was able to view contrasting traits. The plants were either tall or dwarf, period. There is no you cannot see any characteristic feature that is interim between these two extremes. So point number 3 says that there were no characteristic feature which had gradation. So contrasting traits were clearly visible. Coming to the next one, 4th point and the last point for this, why Mendel's results were reliable, was that he was able to provide accurate quantitative results. So all these 4 characteristic features will tell you why you can trust and go ahead with Mendel's results, and you can trust all his laws of inheritance, and you can further understand the mechanism of how genetic works in nature.